It was raining heavily that night. Lightning flashed, illuminating the dark sky. In an old house on the outskirts of town, a boy named Adit receives a mysterious package. He had never ordered anything, let alone something like this, a creepy old-looking Pocong doll. There is no sender's name, no home address, just a shabby cardboard box with the doll inside. Adit lives with his mother, Buwati, a widow who works hard to support them. Since his father died in a tragic accident, their lives have never been the same again. However, Adit's initially ordinary life begins to change since the doll enters their home. At first, the doll was just placed on his bedroom table, but the first night was already strange. When Adit woke up in the middle of the night to have a drink, he saw that the doll was no longer in its original place. He thought maybe he had forgotten to put it back, but the next day, it moved again. Something was happening, something that couldn't be explained. The first day after the doll arrived, Adit brought it to school to show his friends. They were all amused and scared at the sight of the little doll. "Seriously, Dad, this doll looks like the real thing," said Ryan, his best friend. "There's no need to be exaggerated. It's just an ordinary doll," Adit replied with a laugh, although in his heart he felt something was wrong. However, the strange events continued. When he returned home from school, Adit found the doll sitting on his bed, even though he was sure he had left it in his bag. His mother was also acting strangely. Buwati claimed to have heard whispering voices from inside Adit's room while she was cooking in the kitchen. That night, Adit tried to ignore his fears and slept as usual. However, at around 2 in the morning, he woke up to a strange sound. It sounded like a cloth being dragged across the floor. His heart was racing. Slowly, he glanced at the table. The doll was not there. With bated breath, she turned to the bedroom door. Her heart almost stopped when she saw the doll sitting on the floor, facing her, not moving, not making a sound. But something felt very wrong. Adit gripped his blanket tightly. He tried to convince himself that this was just a dream. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then opened them again. The doll was closer now. A chill crept up his spine. Her heart was beating so fast that she could hardly breathe. She wanted to scream, but the sound caught in her throat. Then suddenly, the doll fell to the side as if losing its balance. With trembling hands, Adit immediately ran out of the room, heading to his mother's room. He knocked frantically on the door. "Mom! Mom! Help!" he shouted. Mrs. Wadi woke up and immediately opened the door. "Adit, what's wrong?" "The doll, Mom. It's moving on its own." Buwati looked at Adit's room. Everything looked normal. There was nothing strange. She sighed and rubbed her son's head. "You had a bad dream, son. Already, just sleep with Mommy tonight." But Adit was sure it wasn't a dream. He couldn't sleep all night. And the next morning, when he returned to his room, the doll was back on the table. It was as if it had never moved. But something more terrifying awaited. At the bottom of the doll, there was a shabby piece of paper that wasn't there before. With trembling hands, Adit picked it up and read the words, "Don't throw me away." Adit felt his whole body freeze. He turned the doll over, taking a closer look at it. It was then that he noticed something he had never noticed before. The stitching was sloppy. It was as if the doll was not made in a factory, but sewn by human hands. To make matters worse, there was a brownish stain on the bottom like dried blood. She dropped the doll and ran out of the room. However, this was just the beginning. The doll was not just an ordinary toy. It had something more sinister about it than just its shape. Adit didn't realize it yet, but the doll had a tragic story behind it. That night was just the beginning of the terror that would haunt Adit and his mother. Because inside the doll lies something more sinister than they could ever imagine. And to make matters worse, the doll cannot be disposed of. What exactly is the secret behind this doll? Why does it keep coming back? And who sent it? The Pocong doll was not just an ordinary toy. Since it first arrived at Adit's house, it began to show strange signs. At first it just moved, then mysterious noises appeared at night. But now there was something even more terrifying. A message written on shabby paper. "Don't throw me away." Adit was sure this was no coincidence. His mother began to feel worried, but still tried to calm her son down. However, strange things kept happening. The doll always came back, no matter how far away it was thrown. Now, Adit and his mother had to find out what was really going on. because the longer the doll stays in their house, the more it becomes clear that they are no longer the only inhabitants of the house. That morning, Addit couldn't take it anymore. He took the doll and put it in a black plastic bag. In a hurry, he left the house and threw it into the trash can in front of the compound. He hoped this was the last time he would see it. However, later that night, as she was about to sleep, she felt something cold under her blanket. Her heart almost stopped when her hand touched something soft. Slowly, he pulled back the covers, and there on his bed, the Pocong doll stared at him expressionlessly. Addit jumped out of bed, screaming at the top of his lungs. His mother immediately ran into the room. "What's wrong, Dit? Why are you screaming?" "Mom, this doll, I threw it away, but it came back." Addit pointed at the doll with bated breath. Mrs. Waddy looked at the doll with a confused expression. "Are you sure you threw it away?" Addit nodded quickly. "I threw it away this morning, Mom. I swear." Buwadi took the doll and looked at it. Although she was not a believer in mystical things, her instincts told her that something was wrong. "We'll burn this doll tomorrow," she said finally. Addit felt a little relieved. He hoped the fire would put an end to all this. However, that night he still had trouble sleeping. He felt that someone was watching him from the corner of the room. And sure enough, around 3 a.m., he was awakened by a small sound like cloth being dragged across the floor. She didn't want to look, but curiosity got the better of her. Slowly, she turned her head to the side. The doll was no longer on the table. Suddenly, he heard the sound of soft breathing from under his bed. Addit immediately pulled back the covers and closed his eyes tightly. He wanted to scream, but his body felt stiff. Second after second passed like torture. Then he heard a small whisper. "Don't throw me away." His voice was hoarse, like it came from a throat full of dirt. The next day, Addit woke up pale. He didn't want to be at home any longer. However, his mother still planned to burn the doll. They took the doll to the backyard, lit a match, and threw it into the coals. However, as the flames began to burn through the fabric, there was a strange sound, like a hiss, or maybe a low moan. Addit and his mother recoiled in horror, but they waited until the doll turned to ash. They thought it was all over. That night, Addit was finally able to sleep peacefully after a long time. However, in the middle of the night, Mrs. Waddy was awakened by the sound of small steps from the kitchen. Carefully, she got out of bed and walked towards the source of the sound. When she reached the kitchen, she saw something that made her almost faint. On the dining table, there was the Pocong doll, intact, as if it had never been burned, with a piece of paper next to it that read, "I told you, don't throw me away." Buwadi stepped back, her body trembling. She turned her head towards Addit's room, making sure he was still sleeping. However, just as she was about to step away, suddenly, the doll moved slightly. They had burned it, but it kept coming back. There was no way to get rid of it. Now Addit and his mother began to understand that this doll was not just an inanimate object. There was something trapped inside. And what's worse, they might have woken it up. Who exactly is hiding inside the doll? Why couldn't it be destroyed? And what would happen next? The Pocong doll cannot be thrown away. It couldn't be burned. Every time Addit and his mother tried to get rid of it, it always came back. Even after being thrown into a fire, the doll reappeared, intact, as if it had never been touched by fire. Now they began to understand that there was something trapped inside the doll. Something that wanted to be heard. Something that wants to come out. And tonight, the secret behind the doll's seams will be revealed. Buwadi stood trembling in front of the dining table. Her eyes were glued to the doll that should have turned to ash. She wanted to scream, but her voice was choked. From the back of his room, Addit woke up. He heard his mother's footsteps in the kitchen. Slowly, he came out and saw his mother's pale face. "Mom, why?" he asked, even though he already knew the answer. Mrs. Waddy pointed to the table. Addit followed her finger, and when he saw the doll, his knees almost buckled. "Mom, how come?" The mother and son looked at each other, fear enveloping them. Buwadi finally made up her mind. "We have to find out what's inside this doll." She took a pair of scissors from the kitchen and with trembling hands began to cut the stitches in the doll's abdomen. At first, only cloth and cotton came out, but then something fell to the floor, a roll of old paper. Adit picked it up carefully. As he unrolled it, a faint handwriting came into view. "My name is Sorry. I'm not supposed to die. Please help me." They looked at each other. Adit felt dizzy. Who was sorry? What did this message mean? But before they could think further, something happened. The lights in the kitchen flickered, then went out completely. The room became pitch black. Then there was a sound, a soft cry from inside the doll. "I'm still here," Adit screamed. Buwadi grabbed his hand and ran out of the kitchen. They locked themselves in their room, trying to breathe calmly. However, small footsteps could be heard outside the door. And then, a soft knock. Knock, knock, knock. The atmosphere became tense. Adit held his breath. His mother clasped her hands tightly. Then the voice came back. "Help me!" Adit wanted to cry. This had gone too far. But then his mother spoke. "Sorry, who are you?" There was no answer. There was silence. Then something surprising happened. The knocking sound stopped. And slowly, the sobbing turned into a whisper. "Bury me." Adit and his mother looked at each other. Their hearts were beating fast. "What does that mean?" Adit whispered. Mrs. Wadi thought quickly. "Maybe this doll does hold someone's spirit, and maybe it wants to be returned to its place." They had no other choice. In the morning, they took the doll to an empty lot at the edge of the village, near the cemetery. There, they started digging with a shovel. When the hole was deep enough, they placed the doll inside. Adit looked at the doll once more before they began to fill it in. "I hope this is really over," he whispered. As the last of the soil was covered, the wind picked up. It was as if something was finally free. The mother and son looked at each other. For the first time in days, they felt relieved. That night, they slept peacefully. There was no sound of steps, no whispers, and most importantly, there was no doll in Adit's bed. The Pocong doll is not just a toy. It was a home for a trapped spirit. Now it's back where it belongs. And for Adit and his mother, this will be a nightmare they'll never forget. But one question still remains. Who sent the doll to their house? Because out there, someone knows the secret. And maybe one day the doll will show up at someone else's house.